When the Boston Globe dropped its lawsuit against former Boston.com editor Hilary Sargent this week, the paper got a reprieve from making the news as opposed to reporting it. But now it's stuck with a very awkward summer to-do list. After Hilary Sargent accused Globe editor Brian McGrory of sending her an inappropriate text, the paper went to court to force her to cooperate with its investigation. But now the Globe says it's already learned crucial information that makes continuing that lawsuit unnecessary. For the public, though, there are unanswered questions, like whether the investigation will address Sargent's claims of a broader sexual harassment problem at the paper, how long the investigation is going to take, and whether the findings will be shared with Globe readers. Also unresolved, the Globe's inquiry into fabrication allegations against columnist Kevin Cullen. When we asked the Globe for answers, they pointed us to a court filing that wasn't very helpful. So, like other Globe readers, we'll be waiting to see how candid the paper chooses to be. Another thing I think is still unclear is how the investigation, or who I should say, is conducting the investigation. We know that at least one outside investigation is being done by an attorney from Proskauer Rose, which happens to be the same firm that the Globe also has hired to represent it, which strikes me as an awkward arrangement. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. There were references, or at least one reference in court filings, to an internal investigation as well. That was something that I was hoping the paper could maybe shed some light on. Again, the response that we got from the Globe was not overly helpful in that regard. But what do you all think the paper owes readers in these two cases, which are, they're different, but they're both recent embarrassments that the Globe has had to grapple with? How forthcoming should they be?
You've got two former Globies here, and I personally think that if it's public record, they should report on it. If it's something that's not out on the public record, it's a little fuzzier about whether or not they are obligated to share those details. Personally, I'd like to see that they go back to kind of one of the crux of the problem, which is she said she tried to bring some information to them about former employees, about sexual harassment, and was dismissed without a conversation. And I think that maybe this is a time to revisit that conversation and have it and see if something can clear the air. And then when that conversation is had, would you want there to be an article in the Globe? Would you want there to be a note from the publisher? What's the right, or is That's a good question. Yeah. Again, I'm not sure our general readership really cares about internal Globe issues as much, about what happened 20, 30 years ago, about what's happening with people who are no longer there. They might be, though, and I think it's part of a bigger national conversation that the Globe should be involved in.
Well, that's the complication. Yes, ex-Globe number two. The complication with that and the public, how much the public wants to know, is that the Globe right now is also reporting on the Me Too movement. Right. And if the Globe wants other institutions to be as transparent as possible, and we want to know everything about Harvey Weinstein, and we want to know everything about all these other cases, it's really difficult for the Globe not to have full transparency and full disclosure, as uncomfortable as it is in this case.
So let me ask you something like what I asked Lila. Would you want an article sort of summing up, in the case of the Sargent allegation or allegations, would you want, when that investigation is done, a piece in the Globe describing what the findings were, or would you want, say, the actual outside investigation itself, the documents provided, in PDF form or something else?
Everyone links to the documents now, so, maybe that's part of the standard, procedure of a reporting a story like this in this day and age. I don't think I need death by 1,000 cuts every incremental step in the story, but I think I want a full accounting in article form at the end of it.
Let's turn to Cullen, because we haven't, unless you want to turn to
I was just going to say that I think that this is a case where you don't necessarily weigh whether the public cares about a story. It's played out publicly in such a bizarre way that I think whether this is kind of like, this is information we believe we need to at least share, whether you care about it or not, because we need to get it all out there. How much do you put out there? I think you put it out certainly in the form of a well-written article, either by someone internally, or maybe you bring in a freelancer from outside so that it adds a little bit more credibility to the story. But you do lay out most of the details. Obviously, you don't want to put 100%, because there's some things that you might want to protect some other people who weren't even part of it and maybe caught up in it. So I think you're careful in what you put out there, but I think you put out the bulk of it just so you can put this story behind you and move on.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because if you have a Globe reporter writing up the story when the Sargent investigation is done, Brian McGrory has recused himself from coverage of sexual harassment, I believe, of this story, but that same reporter who synopsized the findings, could that end up being edited by Brian McGrory down the road, which is a potentially awkward situation.
Yeah. It really,
let's talk Cullen, because that is a different case, but there's the same question, I think, of how much should the paper disclose when its findings are all in? Does it provide them all to the public? Does it write about them? Does it do an editor's note? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to talk about Kevin Cullen, and I don't think that that investigation should be overlooked with all of this this other stuff
2
that's
months old
going
now,
on.
by the way.
2 months old now. You know, I think the Cullen investigation is different because it's about journalism. And I think because it's about journalism, the obligation for transparency on the part of the Globe is, if anything, even higher. And I think that when that is finally wrapped up, or when they're finally ready to release it, I think they owe it to the public to tell us everything. And it's possible that it will turn out that Kevin Cullen has been put through this 2-month ordeal for very little. And if that's the case, we should know that too.
Go
ahead.
What I would add also is that I hope that after that story, whatever the information is that is put out there, perhaps there can be something written about what is actually done now to make sure these kinds of things don't happen again. And not just, oh, we're doing whatever, but some real concrete steps. And here are some, some safeguards that we're putting behind those steps, just so the public can maybe be put at ease to know that, okay, they made mistakes, and going forward we can feel a little better about what's happening there at the Globe.
I think that's a very good point, and I think that's more important than all of the details that just may end up being embarrassing to some people.
Because we're not hearing a ton from the paper, there's a lot of tea leaf reading going on by those of us who talk about this stuff from the outside. Should we read anything into the fact that it has been almost 2 months and there's no conclusion, or is that not necessarily indicative?
There are things that we could speculate about, and you and I were speculating about that
do it off
earlier.
camera,
But I'm not going to do it on
I saw
camera.
Joanna shaking her head too. So.
It's
Yeah,
like
I
a
don't
jury.
think so.
Don't speculate on what they'll come back with.
All right,
Or
so,
election.
Or election.